Democrats basically ran the table,
Yeah.
and even picking up, election in Georgia and Mississippi, and of course New York, as well as Virginia and New Jersey, as you were mentioning. So, what's your assessment of why that happened and why Democrats really bounced back so much in 2025?
Yeah. I mean, look, I think the biggest reason it happened kind of sheds a retrospective light on what happened in 2024. I mean, voters remain deeply unhappy with their economic circumstance, and that is always really hard for the party in power. The triumphalist assertions after the 24 elections that large numbers of non-white voters had realigned on a lasting basis to the Republican Party because they were alienated from the cultural liberalism of Democrats, I think, doesn't really hold up very well against election results in 25, in which in both Virginia and New Jersey, Democrats restored their vote to about 2/3 of Latinos and about 90% of African Americans. And obviously Mondami and the Prop 50 in California had overwhelming numbers among those groups. Now, it is true, I think, that 25 doesn't fully answer what will happen in 26, much less 28, because Trump did best in 24 among low propensity voters, people with the least vote history. That's true across racial lines. And those are the voters who are least likely to show up in a off year election. So maybe there are first time Latino or Black voters who voted for Trump in 24 who won't show up in 24 and 25. The Democrats still will have to convince in 28. But the basic dynamic which we saw all over the world in 24. It was why it was so hard to kind of, attribute what we were seeing to some kind of unique cultural revulsion at Democrats when incumbent parties all over the world were getting hammered by inflation, as Joe Biden did. But, we saw, I think that continued, but also we saw that the pullback from Trump that was evident in polls in 25 played out at the ballot box in 20. And that's really important because people in so many ways, you were talking about kind of dominant narratives, that Trump has repealed all the laws of political gravity, right? And to me, as I said often on TV in the next week after, was to me the big lesson of the 2025 election was that the fundamental things apply, as Bogart said or been saying to in Casablanca. Because, certainly over the last 30 years and even back, I think, into the 80s, the dominant, and to some extent throughout American history, the dominant factor in off-year elections are voter views about the performance of the incoming president, right? Mm-hmm. In 2018, 90% of people who disapproved of Trump voted Democratic for the House. Over the two sets of Senate elections when he was president, 18 and 20, Susan Collins of Maine is the only Republican Senate candidate in either of those elections who held their Democratic opponent to less than 89% of the people who disapproved of Trump, right? And so all year, as Trump's approval rating slid, largely because of assessments of the economy, but also because of the chaos and the extremism on so many fronts, there was a view that said, okay, well, Trump's going down, but people have a really poor view of Democrats too. The Democrat favorability is the lowest level in decades. Historically, as I wrote in the spring, the view of the president who's actually in the White House influences election results a lot more than assessments of the party that is not in the White House. But we had to wait for election day to see if that was really true. And it was really true. It was, like the historical relationship applied.